apply.
Thank you. We'll call the meeting to order. This is the meeting for Monday, August 24th, 2020, and it is 6:01 p.m. Agenda item number 1, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask that we all stay standing for a moment of silence for Natasha Morgan, who was a class of 2018 student here in Lewiston. Thank you. Agenda item number 2 is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any members would like removed? If not, the consent agenda passes. Agenda item number 3 is to receive an update regarding the opening of schools in September.
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a number of things I wanted to update you on. In prior meetings, we had a lot of questions that we frankly didn't have answers to yet because of the work that was still ongoing. And I thank you for a very difficult decision so that the work of planning could go forward. There's a number of things that we still don't have resolution on, but I want to give you the clearest picture that I think I can and answer any questions that you may have. I'm going to try to prioritize these. Not any one is necessarily more important than the others because we need all of these things to function appropriately. But some of the things that are, I would say, in the front of our minds, Bobby, Karen, and I, as we try to continue to work towards the opening of schools on the 14th. Transportation is probably the highest on my list today. We're currently short, as of this morning, 11 bus drivers. If you know anyone with a CDL that has a clean driving record, please have them call Hudson Bus Lines. It's not unique to us. Some districts are in better shape than others, but I'm hearing from other superintendents in our entire region that transportation is a challenge. But to challenge us to a point that we're considering things like double runs or things that have caused some slight staggering in our schedule and some limitations. And just for clarity, double runs would mean a bus route that typically would pick kids up, drop them off, and then move on to their next school or area would run through that area twice. And it seems a little bit confusing because we're sending roughly half the kids on Monday, Tuesday, and the other half, a larger part, on Thursday, Friday in the current plan. But because we have the distancing regulations on the buses as well, it limits how many people you can put on that bus. And so we have to be mindful that we're depleted drivers, and in a typical situation, we might be able to just put more kids on the bus and make sure it's full. And right now, full is much less than we used to be able to do. And so there's a volume concern. So the cup's a little smaller. We still have to carry as much water, but the cup's a little smaller, or a lot smaller. In addition, we have a lot of students in out-of-district placements, and those range everywhere from Auburn, Poland, to schools as far south as New Gloucester and Scarborough, and some others as well. But those van rides typically require, or they usually require van rides, much smaller vehicle, much fewer students going to that destination, and we're looking at regulations on vans that are smaller as well. So schools that might have, say, 5 or 6 kids attending, that requires 2 vans. It used to require 1, potentially. And these are unique situations in which students who have that kind of transportation, not typically the van because it's convenient, but the van because it's necessary. And so when you're depleted on drivers, you have concerns about how you're going to get kids to those far distance places. And so we're looking right now, again, for more drivers. Hudson's working closely with us. They've been a valued partner. Mr. Willett over there is great to work with. And Don Rancourt, in charge of our transportation organization, is working nights and weekends, even though I tell her not to try to figure out this puzzle. And so she's working hard, but I need you to know that it's a top priority of ours in the office, and we're close. We're close. I'm really hopeful that we can get it sorted out with the double runs, and I will be updating you consistently throughout the process, because it may be one of those hinges that limits our ability to return to school. That's a real situation that we're working through. For example, I've got some numbers for you, but from a district-wide programmatic place, we usually have there's items like the things that we've requested and the things that are available as far as full-size buses. We believe we need about 36. Right now we have 32. Minibus, we usually need about 14, or projected, right now we have 13. And for vans, 26. Right now we have 21. And so they're working on alternative planning. One of them is one of our special purpose schools that we send kids out to has a larger number of kids. And the question is, can we safely transport that larger number with a bus and free up a few vans? And so they're working on those things right now, but I emphasize that they're working really hard on that. All right, other considerations. Of course, we have considerations around staff. Those numbers look to be okay and workable, and we're having good conversations with building administrators, and HR department is working incredibly hard to make sure that the language of the new law, which interpretations are changing rapidly up to and including last Friday, that we're doing our very best to qualify people that should be qualified for reasons within the law, for either leave or accommodations. And so that process is working through, and last I knew we had about 200 staff that reached out with some level of concern, and a much smaller number than that actually need accommodations or leave, and we're still working through those pieces. So just so you know that there's some numbers that administrators are looking at with their current programming. So how many teachers are going to teach remote? How many teachers are going to be teaching in person? And maintaining that balance and that threshold throughout. And what we don't want to find ourselves in is a situation where a couple of people start to not feel well because it's cold and flu season, and responsibly say, I need to call out today, I shouldn't be in work because I've met this criteria to not go into the building, and have ourselves be too short to run school that day. And so we're looking at protocols for tracking that and finding out, one, what is our threshold, and two, the three of us talked this morning about maybe even having a protocol almost like a snow day, where I get up real early and I look at all of our data points to make sure that we are able to run school that day in each of our buildings. And so if that's what has to happen, then we'll do it. And we're just going to establish that threshold and see what we have available for subs. And it's all coming together, but it's not done yet. Some other concerns that have come up that are not so pressing, but still important. We've had some spots where we have a number of ed techs who are unable to work for different reasons, different qualifying reasons, and it's left some special programming in a little bit of a shortage. And the best way that we have found to try to accommodate that is only where needed, having students in cohorts A and B and not D for 4 days, because we have to figure out our spaces and also our staffing ability to cover those safely. And so that's one situation that we wanted to make sure you're aware of. An area of crossover, we're using the word crossover. At Lewiston High School, students who attend LRTC because of programmatic requirements, they go to school with Director Callahan's programs until about noontime. And so with the modified schedule, so teachers can handle the remote piece in the afternoon, what Principal LeBlanc's looking at is having those students be involved in a cohort where they can attend their programming and provide them other options for their other classes, should they choose to take that on. And so I just wanted you to be aware that there's some crossover there where some kids might be, in effect, by choice, accessing a program in LRTC, but then also taking classes remotely. And again, they'll have some say in that. Assistant Superintendent Paquette or Chief Administrative Officer Bobby, do you have anything else you want to add to that kind of initial list of pretty pressing concerns around reopening?
I think you said that pretty good.
So some additional updates, including those conversations around ventilation. Our facilities director, Josh Bro, has gone around and identified the classroom spaces and/or other spaces that do not have mechanized ventilation. And we've shared that list with administration so that they're aware. And we are looking to find a way to program differently so that people aren't in those spaces, wherever feasible, and work from that. I think if there was anything else I had right now.
We're still working on securing devices. Dave
Yes.
and his team have been working to place orders and bug the folks that need to be continued to be reminded that we need those. But purchase orders have been sent out, and we're just waiting for delivery on devices.
Yeah, it was actually ironic. Our tech director, Dave Taylor, sent me a text. I think it was Sunday morning, might have been Saturday morning, and it was from an AP story that hit the wires about how this is worldwide, and they're looking at somewhere around 5 million devices short for schools as a rough estimate. And while I got the message, I was actually watching it on the news. So it's real. It's a problem across the world with supply chain. I'd also add that we have a number of items that we're looking at purchasing to help facilitate things like outdoor learning spaces, things of that nature. We had initially looked at structures, just good legs in a roof structure, just like an open barn kind of thing. And we found out that to do any work like that appropriately, we would need permitting from the city, which makes sense. But because our time frame is September 30th to submit these items, it just became too cumbersome. So we're looking at temporary structures that have some weights to them that can be held down, that aren't cheap and will fail, but aren't so cost ineffective that it doesn't make sense. And we're using relief funds for that. The time crunch on the relief funds is a real challenge. I would love for our either waivers or extensions to be put up, and that would help. And I think the last thing I have on my mind anyway, is in my notes, is just to do an update on nutrition. I thought I was going to have some pretty hard news to share with you. Some things developed late last week and some waivers were approved. And Nutrition Director, Alyssa Roman, really chased this down and informed the process, and I can't thank her enough. But we were looking at a bit of a cliff with providing nutrition to students. Because we pushed school back, if kids aren't in school, and this was an unintended consequence, this was one of the things I found Tuesday morning after our last meeting. The unintended consequence is we are a reimbursement model. And so when we have kids in school and we provide them nutrition, we submit that and then we get reimbursed. So it's not a general fund item that we just pay for. And because of that, when kids aren't in school and the summer school waivers end August 31st, thought we were going to have to go a couple weeks without providing nutrition to our families. And started reaching out to local organizations and partners and spreading the word, and also our state delegation that helped out a great deal. But the waivers were eventually passed at the end of the week, and so we will be able to provide nutrition to students during that 2-week window that we won't yet be in session. So that's a plus. And the other plus is we had staff in today. Today was our first day. The initial feedback from principals was all good. People, I think, are really excited to be back. There's some energy to being around others. I say that with caution because we want to be safe and follow the precautions. I had to go to the high school this afternoon to sign a document with one of the assistants there. And as I walked in, it was just as we hoped. There was some signage. There was a whole display with what you need: masks, sanitized, signs, explanations, and walkthroughs. And so we're taking steps. We're getting there. And I think that we'll be ready for the 14th. Any questions?
I'm sorry? Is that me?
Yes.
I can't hear you.
Sorry.
Sorry. So I think 3 questions that just kind of popped up through your presentation, Superintendent Lewis. The first was, has Lewiston Middle School been cleaned since the wellness shelter shut down and ceased use of that building?
The showering facilities, It is my knowledge that it has been cleaned, but I can make sure that's verified.
Okay, I know that was a concern of many in the community. The second question, have cohorts already been assigned, and if not, who will folks hear from and when?
So cohorts are being finalized, I want to say as we speak. They've been tentatively finalized, but now they're working on the transportation piece, and they go so closely together that I don't want to release names and then have to move things so that we can make transportation happen. Cohorts were developed initially based on family and siblings so that everyone in the house could go to school on the same day or days. And so that was the initial makeup of it. And then principals and their team worked to balance that with the numbers of people in the school each of the cohort days, and then have shared that information up, which is kind of the puzzle. And I mean, a 1,000-piece puzzle would be a gross understatement. This is about 400,000 pieces, and that's what Dawn's working on to coordinate. So that's how the cohorts are being developed. And then I think what we have is, as far as the time frame to share them, we're trying to make sure that we have transportation all settled first, and then school assignments will come out, cohort assignments would come out by way of the buildings. They would communicate that, so be looking for messaging from your school or principal. That would be the next step. The exact date of that, I'm unsure. Transportation thinks that by next Monday, Tuesday, they might be able to have things really secured, and if that's the case, then I think the messaging would come out immediately thereafter. Or if we know that it's a good projection, then we could probably do it sooner. I don't know if you want to answer that.
And just my last question, what do you need from us? It sounds like, maybe we could have pressured the city to help you move things along faster for permitting or something like that. Is there anything that you can use us to help with? I'll go get a CDL license if I have to. But.
It's funny, I actually asked them for an application, because I don't have a CDL, but I could drive a van, and it's not, right now the real complexity is in the afternoon. I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this, but the complexity is in the afternoon. And I was thinking, so I block out 2 or 3 hours and I drive a van. If that's going to make it work, then we'll figure it out. But we need drivers. And you don't have to have a CDL to drive a van, just a clean record, and Hudson can walk you through the process. But I would say spread the word on transportation. That's a real big one right now.
Thank you.
Mr. Madras-Mullins.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. My first question is regarding transportation. Are we going to be cleaning buses and vans between runs?
So the guidelines have hand sanitizer getting on and off, mask wearing on the bus. You can only sit with family in the seat. And there are some cleaning protocols. I don't believe it's between runs that's required. I don't know if you know any other.
Yeah, no, I don't believe it is. And we don't actually have the cleaning protocol put together yet. We're still working on that with Hudson. So
So would it be fair to say that a student was likely to end up, especially if you're talking about the double runs, but it also sounds like each bus is making multiple runs for different schools anyways.
Right, yeah.
If you're a parent who's got a student going into a bus, it would be likely that that student would be sitting in a seat that had been occupied by a previous student in a different family, and it had not been cleaned in the interim.
Absolutely possible.
Okay. And my second question is whether we are going to be notifying members of the school community about positive COVID-19 tests in their buildings, and if we will be providing public updates on the number of positive tests that occur in OPS and where they occur.
Yeah, so we started working on some procedures around this, and there is guidance from the state. So responding to a positive COVID-19 piece, and I'm referring to some notes because we had already started some of this work, but I'm going to read it to you a bit, and I just want you to know that we haven't necessarily interpreted this down to a building-based level, but this is more district level, and it's still working on it. But it's obviously work with administrators, nurses, and healthcare providers to identify and use the isolation room that's been established in each building as required. And then we're going to use, we've actually worked with our nurses in advance and we're going to formalize some items, but they have shared their concerns about process and making sure we're following the standard and transmission-based precautions and treating students that have symptoms as if they are indeed sick, and then taking those precautionary steps. And then, again, being informed by what we know about those who have possible COVID-19 infection. And then we need procedures for effectively getting kids home. I think in some districts you can call a family member and it just happens. In our school district, due to limited transportation and some high needs, we are working on using some of the CRF funds to acquire additional transportation that we have on site so that we can try to get kids home if that's the best option for them. We have to notify health officials. That's part of what we have to do. And then we also have to notify staff and families. And so what we're working on, if we have a positive case, let me just paint you a hypothetical. So we're also building a procedure where students are expected to self-screen at home. When they get to school, we're going to verify that self-screen by walking through it in the first part of the first class. So as you're sitting there, you're going to walk through it as a teacher or as a staff member and make sure the kids fully understand that checklist and if they're having any of those symptoms. Let's say a kid raises his hand and says, I didn't self-screen this morning even though I should have, but I feel hot and my nose has been running and I don't usually feel like this. So we're going to establish a protocol for what we then do. And so I say establish a protocol because I think that's where it's going to vary by building. We don't want 50 classrooms to send one kid to the nurse all at the same time. And so we're looking at protocols to make sure that we can use social distancing, spread kids out, and send them in an effective way. Or get them out of the class and then effectively have them seen, if you will. If one of those students happens to go to the isolation room to be picked up, and then when they're picked up, we advise them that these symptoms are indicators, and we work with community and clinical services, give them a call, let them know that this is a Lewiston Public School staff or student, and they will help facilitate a COVID test. The latest understanding that I have is we cannot require COVID-19 tests. But let's say one does happen and a student is positive or staff is positive, we have to notify everyone that was exposed immediately. And so I would anticipate, some people call it contact tracing. I'm not going there because we're not contact tracing. The CDC does that. But we know where kids were in their schedule, and so we can notify the people that had an exposure. The language that the state provides in the guidelines is someone within 6 feet of that person for at least 15 minutes. So I think what we would do is then we would notify the people that were in those spaces and not make the determination of, we should call Mr. Physic, but not call Mr. Damon because he's 12 feet away. Obviously, that's not good thinking. So we would contact the people in that classroom and make sure that they were aware of various spaces. Places like the middle school and high school where they exchange spaces, we're going to have to be mindful of that as well. And then once that communication has gone out, we would ask people to monitor. No one can return to that space until it has been sanitized. And maybe missing a step, but following that, it's about self-monitoring and not returning to the space until everything has been sanitized. And of course, if there's any symptoms which already exist, you don't come to school if you hit those symptoms on the self-screening.
Right. So my follow-up question on that, and that seems like a strong protocol, is whether the community at large is going to find out about a confirmed case at the middle school from a communication from the school district, or if they're going to find out about it on Facebook. And I guess my preference would be strongly for the former.
So I would love to say yes, they're going to hear about it from the school first. Facebook's pretty quick.
Yeah.
My assumption is, and I'll be honest with people, it's going to be found out on, or at least rumored to be, which is probably my bigger concern because of the anxiety it will cause.
Right.
It's going to be on Instagram, Facebook, whatever that people are using now, quicker than any form of messaging will come out from Lewiston Public Schools because we have to verify and then be responsible with the information. And so the reality is I'll probably have 90 emails before the message formally hits people's inbox or phone calls, only because of how things move. I actually have as much concern about people becoming sick and testing positive. I have as much concern for that as I do for people being scared and anxious about something that may not be accurate, at least at that time. It's a reasonable fear. I'm not saying it's not, but I think that anxiety can be very charged.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I guess my strong preference would be for the district to establish some sort of formal process for communicating to the public every time there is a positive test, so that folks can rely on a district webpage or district communications, rather than defaulting to sort of a rumor mill that may or may not be true and may or may not be based on anything. So I just think it's important that if we establish from the beginning that we're going to be transparent and clear about it, then we don't have to worry so much about people getting into the whole social media thing.
Sure. And I think there's layers to that too. We have to verify, one, that it's accurate, that two, there was an exposure at school. Because the kid who didn't come to school because he had symptoms for a week, I would want physician recommendation on that. Do you think that that child came to school and in fact potentially exposed others? Or do they feel that, no, they stayed home because they had a pop-up of symptoms before they would have been able to spread? Again, I want to make sure that we can verify. I don't want to create more anxiety than is necessary. If we have a student who has not been attending because of symptoms, who then tested positive, who is now outside of that 10 to 14 day window of spread, we have to be mindful of that piece too. So I want to verify and communicate as effectively as we can.
Absolutely.
Have we had any more discussions on the need and the ability to hire more nurses?
So we, about a month ago, we had a concern we were several nurses short. We have since filled those positions. And I know that Bobby's been working with a temp agency to see what they might be able to do to help with additional either med tech or CNA-like supports. But another thing that we've done is our HR department is working to secure building-based subs. In the past, we've had kind of like one, sometimes two, and right now we're coordinating with CRF funds to have as many as 4. And so what a building-based sub does is they report to the building the mornings that it's open, and they get assigned the things that they need to do on that day. And so we have some great subs that help out, and we're looking to fill that pool so that we have some extra hands on deck every day to assist with things like isolation room supervision, keeping kids distance, things like that.
Because we wouldn't need someone specifically like that can hand out medications or anything like that, but more along the lines of like making sure that in the room kids that were having symptoms were able to have a place to go.
Yep. And we also looked at some screeners as people enter the building for temperature. And those range in cost from, we found some that were $600 that we're not sure is a valid company, so we're looking into that further, all the way up to $15,000+ per unit. And then as we were doing that digging and research, working with our facilities team, it was kind of all over the media that the fever is not a great indicator. It is a indicator of potentially, but it doesn't, you could be asymptomatic and have no fever and walk around spreading it, and you could also have a really high fever from something totally unrelated and be kicked back. So again, we're trying to figure out what the next best option is. If we can secure the ones that are reasonably budgeted, and I don't mean to be overly frugal or economic, but it has to be reasonable. I don't think it makes sense to spend over $1 million on screeners at doors at schools. And maintain social distancing as buses drop off. And so that's why we wanted to start the self-checks in the classroom.
I have one follow-up question. So if we think that a student or teacher might have it, are we sending them to B Street to get tested, or are we going to actually have tests here?
No, so we can make the recommendation, and we have a connection with B Street to facilitate it more quickly, and they've been a good partner about that so far. But we can't mandate it. I did get some light numbers I could dig through my email to find out, but I was curious what's Bates doing, what is USM doing, and how are they doing this? And a lot of them are contracting with private labs, and it's big dollars to have kids tested on a regular basis just for screening purposes. But we are going to recommend and take advantage of that partnership with CCS to have hopefully staff and students go over there and get swabbed as needed.
Can you elaborate on the bolster in the cleaning department?
Yep, so we have some new cleaning devices. We have upgraded some of our cleaning solutions. and Josh Bro, who might even be around here if he wants to jump in, we've looked at additional staffing in times of need. We've looked at the protocols for evenings and the Wednesdays, and so he feels pretty good about where we're at, the ability to sanitize hard surfaces. They're still coming in, but spray bottles in each classroom. So if someone feels like, that just became kind of a high-touch thing, that will get wiped down. But I think the biggest, from a facilities perspective, the biggest thing is the protocols that teachers are already learning and adapting and figuring out in their classrooms. Washing your hands before and after as much as possible, limiting the use of things that are shared, and or wiping them down in between whenever feasible. And so I think it's just going to be a constant. I was in one school the other day, and they had a clean bin and a dirty bin for books, and they were going to let kids use the books, and then they go into the used bin, if you will, and then either be sanitized or have that wait period before they would be going back into circulation. And so some of it's procedural and safeguard, but the report back from facilities is that they're ready to go. They're ready to keep things safe and secure.
So did the cleaning staff get more people?
So we have communicated with the temp agency to assist if we need people. So I think that the sense is that we have, and Bobby, I don't know if you want to chime in on this, but the sense is that we have pretty good protocols and staffing in place. But if we have something pop up and we need additional staff, we have a couple of resources we can reach to try to pull that together.
Yeah, that's spot on. And just as an update to the CNA, MedTech, and custodial subs, if you will, we've got no bites from our temp agencies at this time.
I saw Ron first, so I'll go with Mr. Putman and then back to you, Mr. Damon.
Jake, just a couple quick ones here. One, are all our cohorts right now intact? Are A, B, C, and D all operating as was presented? Rumors out there that D is changing, that it may not be 4 days a week. Is there something that might have changed?
So I shared a little while ago with some of the staffing concerns as far as having enough staff to ensure a safe environment, and or some of these classes that because of the level of need of the kids, the spacing that is required, we're having to split some of those programs at some schools to do AB and not 4-day D. And so that's just built specifically on staffing and spacing concerns.
When will parents have absolute knowledge of if their kid's going to be 4 days a week or 2?
So as soon as we know that transportation is the reality, and we're not going to move those things on people, we're going to let them know. And our goal is to have that by next Friday again. Our goal is latest, but there's the driver concern, and then get that out to people.
Karen, last meeting you said our technology, we were down about 30% on students and having accessibility. We're 3 weeks out. Are we 100% comfortable that 100% of our students are going to be connected? And if not, do we already have a backup plan if there are students that do not have technology and can't do the online?
So there's two parts to that question. One, in terms of internet access, we have hotspots that we are able to deploy, so to give families access to the internet. Now, a device to use the internet with is a different story. As I mentioned earlier, Dave's working diligently to get those devices in. It's not anything that's in our control. As Jake said, lots of districts across the country are waiting on devices to be manufactured and sent to us. We have been working within buildings to determine how many devices we have, and we'll do our best to deploy devices to families like we did in the spring. It's not ideal, but once additional devices come in, we'll continue to deploy those to those that don't have them or need additional technology-based activities and lessons for students to do when they're home, especially at the primary level at K1, K2. Lots of our CARES relief and COVID relief funds, there's a large amount of money put aside for additional resources for those things to be purchased and to be sent home. So we wouldn't want to rely solely on technology at that level anyway. So yes, we're planning for that because the likelihood of having a device for every student on September 14th it's very, very low.
Bobby, a good segue, the COVID relief funds. There's an absolute deadline on spending this money?
There is, and I actually am not managing those funds, that's actually Karen.
So the CARES funds, we have the ability to spend those through next September. The COVID relief funds, which is a larger pot of money that we've been able to secure, there is a deadline to spend those funds by December 30th of this year.
And can we get an active report on where the funds are going, how it's getting spent?
Absolutely.
But I want to add to the technology question that our middle and high school are one-to-one school, waiting to be sent out because of concerns around labor practices. And so that order was placed, it has been shipped, it has been labeled, probably with Dave's name on it, sitting inside of a container ship in China, waiting for it to get here. And then the option to purchase elsewhere, the delays were even greater. And so we're hoping that they come in as soon as possible.
Have surveys been sent to families at the middle school and high school? It's one-to-one. Families that already have their own technology and won't need it, can those be then reassigned to the younger grades?
So there's some potential to that, you know, how do we use our stock to the best of our ability? The middle school devices are, I'm going to say this all wrong, but I'll do my best. The middle school, there are age requirements based on devices and what the devices can and cannot do because of SIPA law or guidance. And so students, once they hit age 13, some of the rules change. So some of the devices are set up differently for that. But I would also say that the middle school devices are managed by a system, if you will. So dispersing those devices to other places would probably be considered mismanagement of those. David, I don't know if you want to chime in.
That would be very difficult to manage because they would be floating around the district. Now, can I take a subset of 20 laptop Chromebooks from an elementary school that has extras and fill a hole over here at maybe another elementary school? We could probably do something like that. But to try to move the high school and the middle school devices around would cause us more problems at the high school and the middle school. So we're actually better off kind of just dealing with our elementary devices amongst our elementary schools.
They're also set up differently, not just because of the age, but the primary schools are going to be using software Seesaw and some other learning platforms. And what happens is Dave and his team, they customize those machines to make it readily accessible for the kids to, when they open up that machine, it's not 10 layers of login for kids who are very young, and he's trying to streamline that process. So those devices get hands-on by our tech team to make those devices ready to do those things. And the things that they do at the 7 through 12 level are very different. And so it's complicated, like everything, I think, these days.
Mr. Damon?
A couple of things. I know that Josh has been working on building that inventory of spaces. And at some point, I'd like to see that.
Sure.
If we could. But as far as the transportation piece of it was concerned, there was an article in the paper the other day that the private bus companies, like Northeast Charter and like that, they're basically dead in the water. Every one of those people that work there had a CDL for buses. Now, there are additional requirements to drive school bus, but they're 80% of the way there. Has there been any outreach to those folks? Because most of those folks have been unemployed since March.
I'll reach out to Peter at Hudson to see.
Yeah,
which
and you
organization
might want
he-
somebody touch base with Scott Riccio, who owns Northeast, to see if he might have it listed even as subs or temporaries he could help you with. I know the same thing was true with Custom Coach down in the Portland area and also with Sear up north. those people, they're bus drivers. Slightly different bus, but
Sure.
certainly they're more familiar with a vehicle of that size and scope, and they do have the requisite CDL licensing for it, so might be an easier transition for them than many people.
Yeah. I'll definitely check that.
As far as the inventory on the, are we balancing the inventory of available spaces with the available staff as well?
Yes.
Building by building?
Buildings are doing that, yes. Yeah. They're going to use the best spaces that they can overall, including as much outdoor space as possible.
Mr. Ryan, did you want to speak at all? No? Okay. Mr. Majerus-Collins?
Superintendent Lemus, I wanted to comment on the earlier issue of fever testing, and I don't think anybody would advocate a $15,000 machine outside every school. I do hope you're able to find something that works, though, because we all understand that, you know, there are people who will get past a fever check who will still be COVID positive, who will spread it, but it will take some percentage of folks out. And the possibility that we'll catch someone who has a fever who doesn't have COVID is not a concern to me, because people shouldn't be coming into our school buildings with a fever anyways.
Right.
So, you know, we're not going to get any sort of false positives in terms of, if you have a fever, you should stay home. And I also wanted to ask if we have reached out to Bates at all about the possibility of utilizing some of their testing infrastructure. You know, I know that they've got a whole thing set up. They have a vested interest in this community continuing to have low transmission rates to allow their students to continue to be here. And I think that it's worth asking what they're able or willing to do to pitch in to help our students and our staff as a sort of sense of community responsibility. So I just throwing that out there as an option to see what they're willing to do.
Yeah, I think it's worth an ask. One of the challenges that we have is that we can't mandate it. And some of the private schools and universities, they can say, hey, look, you want to live on campus, you've got to be tested once, twice a week, what have you. And as we've dug into it, and even a vaccine, actually, I think there's a lot of people that are passionate about, hey, look, if we can't do certain things, we should at least make sure everyone has the flu vaccine, and obviously a vaccine if it becomes available for COVID-19. And short of legislation, I don't believe we can mandate that people take a COVID-19 test or that they get a flu shot.
Would those things apply to staff as well as students? Because my understanding is generally that there are stronger protections on what students are entitled to do despite everyone's best public health benefits than there are for folks who are working in their schools.
Yeah.
That's worth checking on. And then also, you know, even if we are legally not able to force someone to take a test, it's still worth trying to make sure that we have the easiest possible, fastest possible test results for someone, and really urge them to do that out of a sense of shared responsibility for our health and safety.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. I will say that CCS has been a good partner already in some cases, and we've been fortunate thus far. But at least the Abbott test, that quick swab, it's a 15 to 20 minute turnaround, and they've been willing to take us and make appointments pretty quickly. I would also add that in talking to Kayla about the protocols, they have a checklist that they go through that I don't have memorized, but from a medical perspective, and if you meet certain amounts of criteria, they take your sample, actually they'll take it twice, and they'll send one to the state to verify, because the Abbott test is pretty good, but it still has some flaws in its accuracy rate. And so they're sending those to the state, and that takes a few days, and so it's been pretty good, it's been pretty streamlined. But I will reach out to Bates to see what they have and maybe see what resources we can share. As far as the staffing question goes, I would actually want to talk to probably Ms. Levatic and Ms. Linton about just a collective bargaining agreement, and then also, what does it mean if a staff says, you know what, I'm not comfortable with that? And is that an employment disclaimer? Is that a policy where we would terminate someone? And I think we would have some people for different reasons that would not want to take a vaccine. And I'm not saying with certainty, but I think as a public school, I don't know that we would have the ability to say that it had to be done to maintain employment. I don't know.
Yeah, and I would also add, I'd be interested in knowing what our legal, rights are and what we could do. But there's also, steps that are considerably short of terminating someone when we have a need for staff members working remotely. And, in fact, we should be encouraging everyone who can possibly work remotely, who is able to do that, should be doing it. And so, I don't necessarily think that whether it's a test or a flu vaccine or a future COVID-19 vaccine, that the choice would be between remaining employed with the schools or not, but perhaps between being able to work in person or not. And obviously, if you're doing a job where you can't work in person, those two things are where you have to work in person, those two things are one and the same, but there are people in our schools who can and should be working remotely. So I think that that's worth thinking about as well.
Agenda, oh, sorry, Ms. Rai.
Just one final question. I had asked via email this past week about employment vacancies. Last year around this time were quite a number in our district, and now that we're facing this, is that number similar or exacerbated by this situation?
I know that there was some initial work on that. I guess
So
I don't know if you have all that data right now, but I want to just speak.
it's not 100% complete because August isn't done yet. And most of our terminations or resignations come in the month of August.
Okay.
So the best time to ask that question will be
next week.
Yep, in
Okay.
September when we can finish that turnover report for the month of August. So we can report out at that point.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now and on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personal matters, or a student issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name and address. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? I'm going to just come around to the, one at a time, to the podium. Thank you.
So thank you. My name is Alex Diamond-Stanek. I'm a resident of Ward 2, and I have 3 kids in the Lewiston Public Schools. My goal right now is to ask the school committee to move forward in scheduling the postponed July 13th meeting about school resource officers. And in framing that discussion, I would encourage the committee to think about shared values, which might include 1, students being safe at school, 2, having an inclusive environment for teaching and learning, and 3, providing holistic support for the mental health of our students. I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of experience with and support for law enforcement among my neighbors, among staff in our schools, and on this committee. For example, Member Physic's work with the Maine State Police, Member Popfin's work with the Androscoggin County Sheriff's Office. I also say that I was taught growing up to trust and support law enforcement, so I hear my neighbors who say that they feel safer with SROs in schools. With that said, I would encourage my neighbors and members of this committee to consider who we are censoring in this conversation in terms of perspective and values which carry invisible weight. For example, when you center the SROs themselves, there's a lot of positive things that folks come forward to say about individual officers. But when you center the students who are too often underserved by our school system and too often marginalized along axes of race, class, and disability, I worry that SROs, when considered collectively, are not what we need to accomplish our shared goals. And I would point folks to the research that shows that despite our best intentions, school resource officers do not make students safer in schools and do not provide inclusive environments for teaching and learning. I know that folks who support SROs have said that this issue is not about race, and I'm willing to accept that at face value in terms of intent. But in terms of impact, publicly available data on disciplinary measures in Lewiston Public Schools show that Black students, students of color, and students with disabilities are disproportionately impacted by practices like suspensions and referrals to law enforcement. And the negative impact of police in schools is not just on Black students and students of color and students with disabilities. It has a negative impact on everyone. So I'll finish with a personal story about the impact of SROs on my own kids. In particular, how an SRO made clear to my sixth graders' classroom that crime tends to happen in certain areas of Lewiston, and that my kids should be fine so long as they avoid those areas. Quote, "Don't let me catch you on those streets," unquote. So I'm deeply concerned about the messages that my kids are getting about downtown neighborhoods and the people who live there, about where, quote, criminals reside and what they look like. This didn't seem to me like a message about supporting our community and making it stronger. So if we want to be one community, if we want our students to, one, be safe at school, two, have an inclusive environment for teaching and learning, and three, have holistic support for their mental health, this is best accomplished by supporting restorative practices and restorative justice coordinators and counselors and social support within our schools, and not by having police in schools. We need to make space for healing and repair and minimizing harm for everyone. So I encourage the committee to take action to support these values by scheduling a meeting and voting to remove the permanent presence of police in our schools and reallocating those resources to restorative practices, student support, and oversight of school discipline. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Hi, I am Will Diamond Stanek. I am a resident of Ward 2 and I'm a student in Lewiston Public Schools. In the years that I have been a student here, school resource officers have been, in my mind, an unquestioned presence in my school. I have thought of them as reasonable and even necessary. However, over the past year I have started to ask questions about police in schools, and this has been motivated by my direct interactions with an SRO in my classroom and by what I've learned from data on school discipline in Lewiston. My direct experience was with the officer who ran the DARE program. It was the first time I ever talked directly to an SRO, and I noticed that what was said was less about tactics to deal with peer pressure and more about staying away from the wrong sort of people. The officer went around asking about which, quote, bad streets students knew about, and they even created a hypothetical scenario in which someone gets a permanent criminal record by walking down a street next to a fight that would presumably happen on one of the bad streets. This seriously scared me, but apparently if I stayed away from the bad streets, I would be fine. Quote, "Don't let me catch you on those streets," unquote. What really struck home with me, though, was when I asked, "What if you lived on one of the bad streets?" The officer answered, "That's a you problem." What messages are my classmates and I getting about the residents of some places in Lewiston? If this is happening in other schools, what messages are students who live in those neighborhoods getting about themselves and their families? Is this really what we want to be telling, our school system wants to be telling the leaders of the future? And running the DARE program isn't the only job of SROs. They also give and power in school discipline. In addition, I learned that the ACLU wrote a letter in 2017 that said Lewiston's policies on school discipline violate civil rights laws. I decided to investigate this more, and here are some statistics about out-of-school suspensions that I found from the most recently available data for Lewiston Public Schools. Black students are 3 times more likely than white students to receive an out-of-school suspension in Lewiston. White students with disabilities are 4 times more likely than white students without disabilities to receive an out-of-school suspension. Black students with disabilities are 10 to 20 times more likely than white students without disabilities to receive an out-of-school suspension in Lewiston. 1 in 2 black male students with disabilities received an out-of-school suspension. To conclude, reflecting on my own experience and on these statistics, my hope is that things can change for the better in Lewiston. That someday the idea of bad streets will not be a problem for me and my classmates. That restorative justice will be used instead of continual punishment, and that discipline in schools will be about helping people and creating a better future for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Benjamin McManus. I am a teacher of English language learners at Lewiston Middle School. And I have been listening to the committee meetings for quite a while and recognized that there was something that needed to be addressed that wasn't. And so I decided to come here today. But first, I want to take the opportunity to thank Superintendent Langlaise for stepping in to fill the void. It must have been a Herculean effort. And I would like the committee to consider something that I'm about to place before you. Socioeconomically and educationally, America's black population ranks last. However, with respect to COVID-19, we hold the decisive record for being first because our communities are the ones most ravaged. The rate of death and infection among the black population is the highest in the nation, which begs the question, do we want to send our most at risk and vulnerable students for 4 days of instruction in a closed environment where they may be exposed, especially to asymptomatics who are capable of spreading the infection? Is that a risk that we are willing to take? Finally, may I ask the committee to err on the side of caution? Educators across this district have been immersed in professional development classes to ensure that remote learning is delivered with rigor. We do not expect parents to teach their kids. That is our job. What we expect from parents is that they hold their kids accountable for attending classes and doing so on time, doing their assignments. Students in Lewiston are on par with the rest of the state, the nation, and the world because this pandemic has affected students everywhere. What we expect of our school committee is that when making decisions, due consideration is given to all of our students and how these decisions may affect their health and their well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. I've provided a copy of my remarks, which there are additional copies of if you would like them later. And the third paragraph of my statement is essentially an invitation. As a federal employee who's doing work around COVID response, if there are resources that we can help bring to bear, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will reach out to you, Superintendent Langlois, so you have my email address. Yesterday, Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back by police for the crime of being black. 3 of his 4 children were in the car when this violence took place. Natasha Morgan was shot here in Lewiston just days ago. I ask you to remember their names and remember that there are now more children in the world who desperately need our love. Trauma begets trauma, violence begets violence, and hate begets hate. My name is Matt Jaded. I live in Ward 1, and I am the father of 2 boys who attend Lewiston Public Schools. I am a federal employee with 18F, a group of engineers and designers working to improve government services across the nation. This summer, my work has been supported by the CARES Act and involves helping communities across the nation develop innovative ways to safely bring our children back to school. 3 years ago, the ACLU of Maine, Kids Legal and Disability Rights Maine investigated and found Lewiston Public Schools to be in violation of the Equal Opportunities Act, the ADA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Their work uncovered many inequities in our schools, but most egregious was that students of color, Black students with disabilities were subject to punishment and suspension from our schools at a rate at least 10 times higher than that of white students. That is systemic. The solution to high rates of suspension is not to place an officer in the schools. We need to invest in our children's mental and physical well-being, with particular focus on those most in need. Doing so will help our most at-risk students grow as loved and healthy members of our community, reduce the number of suspensions, and therefore create safer and healthier classrooms for all of our children. Trauma begets trauma, violence begets violence, and hate begets hate. I ask all of you to put our most at-risk students first and see them not as potential threats, but wellsprings of opportunity. If your compassion and love for our students is not enough, then pragmatically, I suggest we do this before a class action lawsuit, rightfully brought forward on behalf of our most vulnerable students, financially cripples our schools and therefore our community. We do not need a school resource officer. We need the justice of health and wellness for our most at-risk students. We need counselors and nurses to help our children grow as happy and whole members of society. If we should do this because the law asks us of it, we must do this because our conscience demands that we do what is good and right for our children in our schools and therefore everyone in our community. And I will just close by saying thank you for the work that you do. You are wrestling with exceedingly difficult questions. And I can say that you have colleagues across the nation who are wrestling with the same questions every day as to how we bring our children to schools or educate them and support them. And you are not alone, and I thank you.
Thank you.
I can see you guys expected me to be taller.
You can bring that down if you want that mic.
Sure. Can you guys see me okay? Way down here? Most of you know me already. My name is Miriam, and I'm a resident of Ward 7. I'm actually a born citizen of Lewiston, Maine, and recently relocated back to the area about a year ago. I'm a parent to 3 children in LPS, 2 of whom are Black, all 3 of whom are disabled. But I'm also a teacher in Maine schools, and I am in opposition of any school resource officers in schools. I'm the one who emailed you about how I have put my life on the line speaking out on this issue, and unfortunately also about how my child was abused at Farwell School. I'd like to reiterate my gratitude to Mr. Physique and Ms. Parks for returning my correspondence. As a teacher, I can tell you exactly how racist our local teachers are and exactly how they use school police to harm students. From racist rhetoric in breaks rooms to unfair targeting of Black and brown students in our classrooms. The last thing that our teachers need are allies in racism. As a mother of Black kids, I can tell you exactly how badly Black students are treated in this community. Our youth are in danger. Last year, Lewiston PD referred over 700 students to juvenile services. And according to a USM report, Black youths in Lewiston are detained twice as much as white youth. These kids are not juvenile offenders. They are in crisis, they are Black, and white community members are still on the same nonsense from the 90s, in which they don't see them as belonging, but as outsiders that need controlling and that white children need protection from. Cops do not belong in our schools. They serve only 2 purposes: to groom white children into learning to call the cops on Black and brown people, and to contribute to the school-to-prison pipeline. The same white people who call the cops on our Black and brown community members
are the same white people using SROs to manage Black and brown student behavior in our schools. I'm tired of the argument that this type of racism doesn't exist in our schools and communities. I've been shouted over by hordes of blissfully ignorant white community members who have never a day in their life experienced racism. We know why these community members want cops in schools. The ones who have called Lewiston High School Mogadishu High School. They want cops in our schools to target Black and brown students, to push them out of our schools, out of our eyesight, and away from their kids. Cops are the only thing that separate poor whites and marginalized Black and brown members of this community, and they want to hang on to that at all costs. We are facing unfettered racism in our community and have critical language and mental health barriers. School cops have no training in child development, neurodivergence, or trauma. Last year, we had over 900 Chapter 33 incidences, and 67% of the expulsions in LPS were students with IEPs. The last thing we need are school cops breathing down the necks of populations who are already misunderstood by staff and community. And the last thing we need are students whose parents fled their home country to come here for safety, trying to learn in a school environment made hostile and intimidating by a school cop. School cops don't prevent shootings, and school cops don't make schools safer. They police marginalized students and disrupt their path to success. Today, I'm asking the school committee to listen to the marginalized members of this community by eliminating SROs and ensuring the safety of our children so that they may experience racial equity on their path to education. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak? Do we know if there's anyone in the out back room? And are there any emails that need to be read? Oh, okay. So,
If I do have some, then I will.
Madam Chair,
yes.
I would like to make a motion to suspend the rules to consider the possibility of scheduling a special meeting on August 31st to finally, after almost 2 months, deliberate on and vote on the SRO reform proposal that's pending before this committee.
Jake and I have communicated with the committee and with members of the public that we're working on a plan that we're going to be discussing at our retreat this weekend to the most appropriate way to address overflow of people who want to speak and have this conversation. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Jake. But.
I would second the motion before that.
Thank you.
Occurs just so that we have something we're discussing, just procedurally, if that's okay.
Yeah, I know that Sparks and I have discussed having just a process around that so that we can hear various opinions and have people have advance notice and be invited to speak to different components of the conversation. And then having some opportunities to hear from SROs, people in favor, people not in favor, positives, negatives, anything that people want to share. I think if we explore, and we're going to do this on Saturday, but explore a process that the committee would agree to have that conversation in different tiers so that we could be as informed as possible.
Mr. Donovan?
Respectfully, we've been hearing that since the beginning of July, so I figured we would have had some sort of meeting way before now. I mean, I know we're dealing with COVID-19 and there's a lot of things, but we've also been here till 10:30 at night sometimes. So I mean, I know we have time, we have the ability to address it like ASAP. So I don't know, I don't feel comfortable waiting until Saturday.
Mr. Potvin?
Yeah, I'm burnt out on this. 2 months. 2 months for any public process is disgraceful in terms of government. You have a significant amount of the board that wants this issue discussed and taken care of. We've held the city hostage, per se, for 2 months, talking as I watch, where she's over there, you know, different people from the public going back and forth and back and forth and attacking each other. We need to bring this to a head. There is nothing more that people are going to bring to that podium that we have not already seen in 200 emails to the committee, to the various personal discussions, phone calls, et cetera, so on. You know, I think it's clear that a statement's been made, and we just want to get it to the point where we can vote. And I totally support what Member Collins is suggesting.
Just point of order, we're discussing a motion to suspend the rules, not the actual motion itself at this point, just in terms of clarification, if that's helpful. I don't know.
Mr.
I'm
Collins?
in for suspending the rules.
Cool.
Well, I appreciate Member Potvin and Member Donovan's comments. Because Member Ray is correct, I'll keep this comment focused on the reason why folks should vote to suspend the rules. And that is simply that it is time for this committee to make a determination about setting a definite date when we're going to vote on this. I see that members of this board who want this proposal voted on have been exceedingly patient, have endured last-minute changes to when it will be brought up for discussion, citing accessibility concerns that have subsequently never been addressed. And so, you know, I would really encourage my colleagues to support suspending the rules so that we can consider a motion to schedule a deliberation and a vote on this subject 1 week from tonight and settle this one way or the other before the school year starts. So that's my request. Please vote to suspend the rules so that we can consider scheduling this meeting for a week from tonight.
Would any members who haven't spoken like to speak?
Yeah, so is it this weekend coming up?
Saturday is when we planned to have, so there are still accessibility issues. So opening it up as a regular agenda item, which is what's been requested, well, let me take a step back. The reason it was originally rescheduled by the previous chair or canceled by the previous chair was because of the accessibility issues and safety concerns. And so addressing those is what our IT department has been working on, finding ways to do that. One of the ways to prevent that from happening would be to possibly have a series of workshops where people can come and speak. And so if the workshop subject is specifically for the committee to learn more about what the SROs do, then there would be that. And then for people to speak who are opposed to the SROs, there would be that. And that would give us the opportunity for everybody to have their voice heard and everybody who wants to speak on it to be able to speak on it without having the excessive people in the building at the same time. So that's one way to get it scheduled. It has been delayed for a little while now, for several weeks. The focus of our meetings has been primarily on returning to school. So there's nobody, I feel like there's implication that it's being kicked down the road so that we don't have to vote on it, and I just want to clarify that that's not what's happening. We had to prioritize things with return to school before we could discuss what's going to happen in the schools. And it has been an ongoing conversation to try to figure out the best way to do that.
And respectfully, from in early July, I wasn't in my spot and you weren't in your spot yet. So I guess I'm just looking at trying to make sure that we have a process, because I too receive numerous emails, and I just wanted to have a platform so that the floor can be open with due process so that our community can speak to it in a public forum and so that we can hear that.
Mr. President.
I don't like Mr. Collins' motion. I think this has been a divisive issue, and I think our country's divisive, Lewiston's divisive. I think what a way to actually kind of bring, we can always disagree, but what a way to bring community people together on both sides of an issue and come and talk to it like educated people versus being on Facebook, going back and forth. You know, I heard people's lives were threatened. I don't know how true that is, but I think we need to take this time to, again, it's a divisive issue, come together as educated people and discuss this issue and get dialogue back and forth instead of I'm on this side, we're on this side. So I'm going to say no to his motion.
Ms. Wright?
So just to clarify, clarify, when someone makes a parliamentary claim, that is not speaking to the issue, so I haven't spoken yet, so I just want to note that for future discussions. Speaking on suspending the rules, I think folks are feeling backed into a corner, for sure, with public pressure. The council is continuously relaying what they hear to me. I also get all the council communications that are sent. I also get all the school committee communications that are sent. My email inbox is insane. And so I think by devising some plan tonight, I think that's entirely appropriate given the fact that folks reached out and they said, how do we get this to happen? And I honestly didn't know what to tell them. And so I think the motion to suspend the rules comes in at an appropriate time. And once we get a motion on the table, that is the time to discuss what this committee wants to do and what this committee wants to hear. I do think everyone deserves to have their voice heard, but we've pushed it so far back at this point that, we've got August 31st is an option, which it sounds like will be suggested. September 7th is not an option because that is a federal holiday. And then we're in school September 14th because students are returning to school that day in the hybrid model. And so I think we're kind of out of time, and so I will be voting in support of the suspension of the rules.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan?
I want to be careful about what I'm talking about, because technically we're only supposed to be talking about the suspension of rules, but just 2 weeks ago, we had plenty of people here. And so I guess I just don't understand what the accessibility thing is. We had dozens of people in here providing their comment. So I guess I just don't know what the accessibility concerns are. Other than the obvious ones that, are brought forth by COVID-19.
I'm right with you, Mr. Donovan. I feel like if it's important to you, you're going to be here. But I don't know if we're supposed to be talking about that, because I guess we're just supposed to be talking about suspending the rules. But I guess I don't know either way. I know that we need to talk about this. I don't think we need several meetings to talk about this, but I want to make sure that everybody can be heard. And I think this board needs to be completely informed of everything. There's many of us that have no idea what's going on with SROs, safety for the children. We don't know because we're not in the schools. So let's just do it. Let's have a conversation in public. It's just going to be a really long meeting, but hey, everybody's used to that.
Mr. Majoros-Collins?
Thank you. Again, I want to focus my comments on specifically just suspending the rules tonight. I think that Member Ray really hit home on this, which is that, we need to deliberate about how and frankly whether we're going to take this issue up and make a decision on it. And my suggestion for August 31st is going to be the next thing I say if this committee votes to suspend the rules, but by no means that is the end-all be-all solution for taking this up if folks have different ideas. It's just that we're now 2 months in, and it's really important that we have a conversation as a committee to ultimately schedule this and give people a clear answer about what's going to happen with this reform proposal. So I would call the question and ask for a roll call vote on the motion to suspend the rules.
Ward 1?
No.
Ward 2?
No.
3?
Yes?
4?
Yes.
5 is absent. 6?
Yes.
7?
Yes.
Myself, no. Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Passes 5-3, one being absent.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Majoros-Collins?
I would now like to offer a motion to schedule a special meeting for August 31st, 1 week from tonight, and have as the sole agenda item the consideration of and vote on the pending SRO reform proposal. I guess I'll ask if there's a second, and then if it's okay. Thanks. I think that Member Ray earlier laid this out really clearly. Monday is the last regular Monday opportunity we have to consider this topic before school starts. I think it is incredibly important that this community be offered the opportunity to fully express their opinions on this issue, and then to get a resolution from the school committee one way or the other before the school year begins. I appreciate Member Physics' comments that this has been a divisive issue. And I'll be honest, in my conversations prior to bringing this reform proposal forward, I had specifically and considerably moderated the proposal in an effort to develop something that could be broadly acceptable to a large group of people. Obviously, that has not been as successful as I might have wished. But nonetheless, this committee owes the city of Lewiston an answer on this question. It is, aside from the ravages of this pandemic, it is the topic that has dominated local civic conversation for the last 2 months, with rallies and petitions on both sides of this issue, with hundreds of emails, with phone calls. People have really spoken out in ways that I tremendously agree with, and some that I can't comprehend, but I applaud every single person who's taken a position on this issue and spoken out, and I think that we owe them an opportunity to say their piece in a public forum, to have us all ask the questions, hear the arguments, and then finally put this issue to rest one way or the other on this reform proposal. I think we need to do it before school starts, and thus, on the basis of our calendar, August 31st is the only available Monday evening to do that.
Can I just ask just a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing the proposed language? I wasn't in my chair at the time with all the meeting cancellation and all that.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Let me see if I can pull it up on my email.
If we were to have this meeting on following next Monday, would that mean that we're still going to have a meeting this weekend?
The meeting this weekend is the retreat to work on
Okay.
boardsmanship and
Okay, so I just want to make sure
understanding
we're still
procedural
having
rules.
that. Okay.
While he's looking that up, would you like to speak, Mr. Donovan?
I completely agree we should take up the issue on Monday. Is it possible that we request our SRO to be present at that meeting? I mean, obviously, I don't know. I'm not saying we force them, but we request them to be there just in case we have questions.
I mean, I would have no ability to force them anyway, but we can, I think we would make it known, I mean, publicly on the agenda that this is going to be a topic of discussion, if not the topic of discussion. I think that there are numerous people, if they're available, on this notice to attend, that they probably would. I don't know, I can certainly share it.
I just wanted to communicate to Superintendent Langless and to the public the specific language of the proposal, which was submitted on June 29th, so it's been a bit. The proposal is as follows. The Lewiston School Committee instructs the superintendent to reduce the number of SROs in Lewiston Public Schools from 4 to 3 by the start of the 2020-2021 school year, and limits the number of SROs in Lewiston Public Schools to 3 in all future years unless otherwise authorized by the school committee. The Lewiston School Committee instructs the superintendent to end the use of the Drug Abuse Resistance Education DARE program in Lewiston Public Schools by the start of the 2020-2021 school year, and prohibits any SRO from being designated as a DARE officer. The Lewiston School Committee instructs the superintendent to reassign the SROs in the following manner. 1 SRO stationed at and responsible for Lewiston High School, 1 SRO stationed at and responsible for Lewiston Middle School, and 1 SRO stationed at either Longley School, the Dingley Building, or the Lewiston Police Department headquarters, and responsible for all other LPS facilities. The school committee prohibits the permanent presence of any SRO at any LPS elementary school. And finally, the Lewiston School Committee instructs the superintendent to reallocate funds budgeted for a 4th SRO to be used to hire a restorative justice coordinator at Lewiston High School. As you can see from the language of the proposal, lots of elements here are by the beginning of the 2020-21 school year, which is another reason that we ought to get this settled one way or the other before September 14th. And I would say to my colleagues that I'm not making the case tonight for this proposal. I think that there's a very strong case to be made for this reform. But what I'm asking is that we take up the issue, that we hear the arguments, that we deliberate on it, and that we decide. And I will make another case at a later date for why I think you should vote yes on this proposal. But whether you're leaning yes, whether you're leaning no, whether you're undecided, whether you think I'm out to lunch, I hope that you understand that our community is owed an answer on this subject. That it has been a divisive and difficult issue for so many people in Lewiston, and that whether we decide to pass this reform proposal or not, it is going to put us in a better position starting the school year to have this issue settled and decided, and then, next November, voters can decide whether we made the right decision or not. But I think it's important that we deliberate and settle it once and for all to move into the school year with an answer.
I'm just curious because I'm going to work closely with Sue to, if this passes, to create this agenda with Ms. Parks. Is this new policy we're initiating? Is this a change in policy?
These are
Budget changes, there's all kinds of changes.
Well, just there's a number of implications to put it in the agenda to share it publicly.
Yeah.
I don't believe having SROs in schools is currently written into policy. Are we establishing a new policy?
These are instructions to the superintendent. So this would just be, we're directing you to, and then you look into how that gets accomplished. If it requires a policy change, you come back to us with a policy change. If it doesn't, you just go ahead and do it. But that's basically, the format of the proposal is, this is what we want to do. We'd like the superintendent to do it. And then obviously whatever roadblocks you run into, you bring back to us and we go from there. So if it passes, and obviously it may or may not pass.
No, I just want to be clear. So this is not policy.
No, it's an instruction, and if policy, has to result from it, then that's another thing. But I'm not convinced that it does because, like you said, I don't know that we mention SROs in policy. Maybe we should, but this doesn't.
I guess that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, no, it's just an instruction to you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that. I think it mostly addresses budget because, as I understand it, the SROs are charged 75% of their salary comes from the school's tax allocation and 25% comes from the city tax allocation. So over the summers, SROs go back and work regular details with the city is my understanding. So I just wanted to clarify that point. I think what Mr. Majerus-Collins presented initially, and this is going back to June 29th, it sounds like, so if I'm wrong, forgive me, but it would be reallocating that funding for restorative justice practitioner of some sort.
That's the fourth element, yeah.
So I think that would involve a conversation with the city, especially the Lewiston Police Department chief, about what that looks like in practice. I also feel like we heard at some point, and maybe my brain's just making this up at this point, but that we don't actually have a memorandum of understanding with the Lewiston Police Department. It's just kind of a handshake agreement of how SROs interact with our school system, that sort of thing. And so I don't know if this is addressed in Mr. Majerus-Collins, I don't know how to pluralize or possessive your last name, in his proposal, but I think that might be an astute step forward, is to come to some sort of agreement, because it's not written into policy. It's just how they interact with our administrators, and that could change from administrator to administrator, I believe. So I think that might be a worthy part of the conversation as well, beyond what has been proposed, which people may or may not agree with, but I think that something has to change at the most fundamental level to establish how we work with the city department on that. I also just agree, we owe people an answer, and poor, Dr. Stanek, who has reached out to me and asked me a bunch of questions about this, and I so appreciate that. But I don't know the answers a lot of times. I don't know when this is going to be scheduled because we haven't had this discussion, and I want it to be scheduled, but I don't want to drag anyone here against their will in order to participate in that. And so I think, if this motion prevails tonight, we should be very explicit about what email address they should send things to if they want the committee to read it, if they want Superintendent Lingless to read it out loud, or how they participate in person, because those are the only options. The Zoom integration does not sound like it's going to come to fruition without a large investment, even though Mr. Terrio has done some great work. I think I've covered everything. Yeah, thank you.
Again, I have no problem bringing the issues for a vote. I think going about it, I don't think we need a bunch of people, on both sides of an issue, chastising each other. I think we bring both sides together in a room and have dialogue. So that's where my position stands.
I would like to state the reason I voted against suspending the rules is not because I don't want to have this conversation. I am prepared to have this conversation. I've been prepared just as long as you have. I've received a lot of feedback from the community. I've gone out and sought out information from the community so that I would be well informed to make a judgment on this. It's the procedural, the way that it's been approached that I disagree with for suspending the rules, including receiving emails from committee members saying, if you don't put this on the agenda immediately, I will find a way to force it, which I feel is what's happening tonight, and that's what I disagree with. I disagree with what I see as an inappropriate action, not bringing this subject forward. I just wanted to clarify that. It's not the subject I disagree with, it's the process. Mr. Majerus, tell us.
At some point, a reluctance to bring a subject up for consideration becomes a de facto reluctance to have a conversation at all. I think that members of this committee who want to see this voted on have been incredibly patient with the school board leadership about this issue. We were told in early July that there was an issue about accessibility, which is a very legitimate concern that has subsequently been not at all addressed. And we dealt with another contentious issue just a couple weeks ago about whether or not we're going to reopen schools, where we had a lot of public testimony, as Mr. Donovan pointed out, with no change in how we took that public testimony. So I am incredulous at the idea that we can have contentious conversations about whether to reopen schools. We can have complicated conversations about any number of issues, except this one, except for some reason this one for 2 months. I really hope that the school committee will see fit to establish a firm date of August 31st to take this issue up. I appreciate Member Physick's desire to bring people together and try to find some sort of common ground, but at the end of the day, we are either going to vote for the proposal or we are not. And it is pretty hard to find a common ground between someone who wants a police officer in a school and someone who does not want a police officer in a school. We can't, of course, split a police officer in half. I just think that we have to approach this issue with an understanding that everybody is coming at it from a place of reasonably good faith, and that people are going to have different opinions, and that we owe the public an actual decision on the reform proposal that's pending. I think that Ms. Ray brought up a couple of issues that aren't addressed in my proposal that can and should be addressed in other ways in the future. I just,
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge the work that Mr. Terrio and his team has been doing behind the scenes to try to address the accessibility issues. It seems like that's being disregarded as it hasn't been happening, and I know that it has been happening, so I want to acknowledge that. I appreciate the work you've done.
I just, two real quick questions. One is this the item that was essentially caused, canceled, postponed because of a language around an ACLU complaint, or potentially? Was that part of that conversation, or accessibility?
Yes, ACLU did, yes.
Okay, and so, I think that's an important piece of information. I guess the second thing is, on the you proposed on the 29th, do you know what the date was that the meeting was scheduled to happen?
The 17th, I believe.
July 13th.
July 13th. Do we know the capacity of meeting spaces? I'm just curious.
We were gonna meet in Connors, so it's the same.
But the state of emergency, was it still at 10? Was it 50? Was it, I don't know.
Because we only switched back to meeting in person once we bumped from 10 to 50.
Okay.
So we were on Zoom before.
I only asked because
5 weeks ago exactly.
if
So
I
whatever
get
we were at 5 weeks ago is where we were at then.
I see. So if Megan and I get an email this weekend, if this is approved, is the board also instructing us to have the meeting regardless? Because if the conditions haven't changed and that information caused us to cancel, I guess I want to be clear on what our expectation is for setup and carry out, follow through.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Yes. I have spoken with the main ACLU about their concerns. I think their concerns are legitimate. I think their concerns have been legitimate since the beginning of the pandemic. I also know that their expectation was that, you know, it was going to get fixed in a couple of days. And when they were told that we might delay this vote until August 10th, the response was basically, are you kidding? Now we're well past August 10th. My sense of it is that the main ACLU would not take issue with us deliberating on this subject. But if board members are concerned about, you know, safety and accessibility, we have on a couple of different occasions considered the possibility of switching back to remote meetings on Zoom where we don't have those same accessibility concerns. We've had weeks and weeks to develop some sort of hybrid model consistent with what the city council is doing. I guess the ultimate sticking point at the end of the day is this board wants to meet in person, and there are virtues to that. But as long as we want to meet in person, we're not going to be able to address those accessibility issues that were raised 5 weeks ago, and we weren't able to address them when we talked about reopening. So
I don't understand this accessibility issue. It's going to be an accessibility issue if it's only online, Zoom or whatever, because
yes.
people might not have
Right.
internet. So that argument's out the window. So can we just go ahead and vote on this so we can move on to the next agenda item?
Ward 1?
No.
Ward 2?
No.
3?
yes.
4?
Yes.
5 is absent. 6?
Yes.
7?
Yes.
Myself? No. Ms. Ray?
Yes.
5-3, passed. So we have a meeting Monday, and the conversation around the motion is to call a special meeting on 8/31 to address the pending motion about SROs. Is that fair language for the notes? Okay, and then I guess what I'm walking away with is that regardless of any messaging we get this weekend, that the committee is in favor of holding this meeting. I only say that because it was canceled before, and I don't want to be sitting on that email this weekend, not sure how the committee would like me to respond. And if we're looking at an ACLU complaint, are we working, or other complaint, right? Because there's certainly many sides to this conversation.
Jake, I think it's fair to tell the public what the capacity is. I mean, our last meeting, I believe it was 25 in here and 50 over there. So if that's what it's going to be, that the public should know, if you choose to want a public testimony, you need to get here, first come, first serve, and everyone else online to give us the information on email.
One of the concerns in the ACLU communications that I had was that our Zoom platform didn't give people the opportunity to participate remotely. I know that that's been worked on, but I don't know if that's, would you like to speak on that?
I've
Or?
got an answer to it, yeah.
Okay,
So
I would like to hear
the answer
that.
is, about 3 weeks ago, we tested, when you remember the guidance counselor, the candidate for the guidance,
HR, yeah.
The HR spoke, and we had the audio issues that were fine. So we resolved it on that day. What I did say on that day was that I would have to do training with the board if we went to a webinar format. So the answer is, I can do training with the board if the board comes an hour before or whatever. I can do training with the board, and we can do a webinar format, which will allow that accessibility. That's a decision the board has to make, because it's setting a precedent.
Right.
So I'll leave it at that.
So determining the time for this meeting, it's going to be a heavy meeting. Obviously, we have members that have to leave early from meetings. So I would say that we would want to start this meeting at 5 o'clock. If we need to be here an hour early, our members are prepared to be here at 4 p.m. next Monday in order to get the proper training. And
we just throw a note that we do have that retreat on Saturday. I don't know, since this conversation happened tonight instead of Saturday, maybe we could use some of the time on Saturday to get that training, if Mr. Terry is going to be here. If he's not going to be here on Saturday, then we'll just...
And I want to protect Dave's time.
Yes.
If people can be here at 4 Monday, Dave's at work. Saturday, I know David, he'll work Saturday anyway on his own accord, but he's not scheduled to work Saturday, and he's works a lot.
No worries.
If we can't, I think we could ask, but if we can, I prefer Monday.
Ms. Wright.
So why do we need training? I'm confused
Because
by
you are
that.
going to be on a, when you're in a webinar,
Yep.
you are actually panel members on the webinar. So it's a different format. So you guys are all panel members, which means that you can either let people in to speak or not let people in to speak. So if you don't want to train the board on how to be a part of a panel in a webinar setup, then it needs at least a couple of people to get the training.
But only the host of the meeting has to have that.
Well, it's really, I think the host is going to need, but I think the chair and one other person really need to be, if somebody's going to let people in to speak, because it becomes a little bit on a lot of the chair to have those dual roles of letting people in, type of thing. So if there's one other person working with the chair, I think it makes it much easier.
Yeah, so just for a point of reference for everyone, the way that we've managed this on the city side is the deputy city administrator. His job is to make sure the Zoom runs smoothly. The mayor, so in this instance, the chair would be the one to say, could you let Dave Terrio in? We wait, we have that, Dale Dowdy does that, lets the person in, says unmute, and we proceed from there, and then they move them back out and move the next person in. So it's just delegated, so I assume here it would be Chair Parks calling people in and Assistant Superintendent Paquette moving people in and out if possible. So that might also solve for our...
Just so we have clear too, though, the city does not do a hybrid approach.
Okay.
The city is completely online. But we can do a hybrid approach, I believe, and I'm willing to give it a shot. It will be our first attempt at a hybrid approach in a meeting, which is a meeting that has...
Right, that was one of the conversations that we had, was that we were going to try it on a less important meeting to see how it went, and we haven't had that opportunity yet.
Right, that's pretty much where we are.
I don't, if Ms. Paquette is willing to be that facilitator, I don't know.
Sure. Whatever you need me to do, I'd be happy to.
I don't know how distracting it is. I'm also, I was about to put my name in the ring for that too. I don't know how distracting it is, but.
It's a little distracting,
Okay.
according to Deputy City Administrator.
So we just want
I'll
you
be
to
distracted, sorry.
live the conversation.
So would we all be logged into our individual laptops in this meeting, or is there just one camera view?
There'll be a camera that's on, completely on all of you.
Right.
In the meeting, so that takes care of that.
Right.
If you're not, if the board itself doesn't want to have the ability to answer questions for people who put in, like in the webinar, people are going to type in questions. If you don't want individual board members to be answering those questions, then we don't need to train the whole board. We can train just a couple of people. I would say Mrs. Parks and Mrs. Paquette already knows how to do this, but I can work with her a little bit to make sure we're all set. So that's something we can do pretty quickly. So whoever needs to show up at 4 can be trained pretty quickly.
Okay. Mrs. Ray.
I just would personally recommend that we don't use Q&A or chat function, that those two are disabled. I was recently in a Chronicle of Higher Education conversation where there were all these protections to not get Zoom bombed, but people put really inappropriate content into the Q&A, and it was really upsetting and unfair to the members participating, both the panelists and the folks who were reading through the Q&A as well. So I would just advocate for that personally, knowing...
How would people send their comments in?
With raised hands, and then being let in.
Be let in to speak?
Yep, and that can be done through both a computer application, but also if they call in via phone, there's a star something that they can do as well to be let into the conversation.
We're ready for that on Monday?
We'll get as ready as we can, we'll give it a whirl, and we'll do the very best we can as always.
Okay.
Recess.
Yes. Are any members opposed to taking a brief recess? All right, we will take a 5-minute break. We are live? Oh, okay. Agenda item number 5, to receive and approve the adjustments to the TPEG 2020-2021. And that will be Sue Williams. Will be presenting.
She may have members of the committee as well.
What did you say?
There may be members of the committee as well if there are any questions. I don't know.
Yeah, you have the copy of it. I'm really just here if you have questions.
Oh, okay. So you're not actually presenting anything?
No,
And so,
I think you
just-
have all the information you need.
Just
Okay, thank you.
by process, there's a representative group that meets to discuss these and includes the association, teachers, and various members of our school department. It's intended to be representative, and so each year they go through and review things, and there are often changes, and the changes need to be approved by the school committee. And so,
I move we approve the changes.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Ms. Ray?
Thank you, Chair Parks. So the first question I had was, who sets the parameters for the TPEG program? Is that the state legislature, the education committee? Where did these come down from?
yeah, so there's language in legislation that talks about schools having a teacher evaluation and professional growth system, and there are, I would say, some guardrails on what that has to look like, and then there's a portion of local control, but within the guidelines. And I'm sure if you want to add to that.
They suspended those rules last spring, and they haven't revisited to say they kind of left districts to do what they needed to do. They haven't revisited that. We're operating under the general idea that we're still doing what we need to do, and these represent fair and reasonable adjustments given what everybody's facing right now, teachers and evaluators.
Ms. Ray?
Thank you for that answer. And just one further question. So the Maine Education Policy Research Institute was doing, I believe, a survey of how people were changing their TPEG regulations in light of the pandemic. And I just wanted to alert you all that I think that was going out at some point to administrators over the summer, but I don't know if it's happened yet.
I am the educator effectiveness coordinator for the district, and I have not received anything from the state. So
I'll check with you.
we are moving forward with what we believe is fair and meaningful for the individuals in Lewiston Public Schools, given what we have to move forward with. And that's what you have before you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr.
Sue,
Damon?
it looks like there's 2 levels here. First and second year teachers do one, and then the third year is a more I guess more in depth about, and that's why this on the third year it's more. Is that more or less right?
Like I said, the license. So the way the evaluation system works is on a 3-year cycle, and teachers in year 3 are the ones that receive a summary evaluation score. So the first 2 years are considered formative years. Teachers are working on goals, they have observation and feedback cycles, and it's in the third year where all of that sort of feedback, evidence, and conversation sort of come together in the final summary effectiveness rating. So it's once every 3 years they get the actual rating. That's the third year for probationary teachers. It's a 3-year cycle for continuing contract teachers.
So potentially there might be like a third of the teachers in each calendar year that would be under that third-year program.
Yep, technically it's not always balanced that way because of hiring and all of that, but yes, technically a third-ish.
And it continues throughout however long teachers are employed.
Yep, it does. There are occasions when teachers have certain things that they need to pay careful attention to, an improvement, and go on improvement plans, and then they are placed on year 3 or an evaluation cycle for a consecutive year. So if in year 3 I have some challenges and I need some extra attention and need a plan for growth and improvement with my evaluator, I'll be placed on that cycle again so that my effectiveness can be measured again in that following year to see if the improvement has happened.
Has the labor signed off on this?
Yeah, they're on the committee. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, Allison Yep, they're
Behind
good.
you, Ron.
It's always labor management, administrators, and representatives from the association.
No further discussion. Are we still doing, do we have to do the roll call votes for everything if we don't have anybody remotely? So we can just do a standard vote?
Unless it's asked for a roll call vote, which any member has a right to ask for.
Okay. All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks.
Agenda item number 6, to receive and approve the first reading of athletic policy JJI, JJI-RI, and Athletic Director Fuller will be presenting.
Just here to talk briefly about the policy that you have in front of you. I feel like I do eligibility pretty regularly in front of the school committee, but just make a couple quick announcements. First, the policy that you're reviewing tonight is basically in response to the new educational plan being set forth for this year at Lewiston High School. This is not because we are upset with the current policy or there needs to be changes. It's just the old policy just doesn't fit what we're doing at school in terms of education. I want to be clear, this is only for this year, the 2021 school year. This is not something we want to continue. It's just going to be in place for 1 year. The policy in front of you involves 2 changes. The first one is the removal of the requirements that students have a minimum number of credits to start. The credit requirements will be reinstated for the 21-22 school year. And the second change, it deals with the number of passing classes necessary to remain eligible. In prior years, students took 8 courses or had the ability to take 8 courses over 2 days. They were required to pass 6 classes. Because of our educational plan, we went to semester scheduling, and students will be taking only 4 classes. So they don't have the ability to meet the minimum requirement of 6 classes. So we're asking the number to be reduced in half in combination to the number of courses they're taking. So it's just going to ask students to pass 3 courses out of the 4 they're passing. So it's really just a response to what we're doing at the school for this year.
Mr. Majerus-Collins.
I move we approve the suggested changes, proposed changes.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 7, to discuss the possibility of a school committee Saturday retreat on August 29th, 2020. I believe everybody had already communicated that they were okay with having this retreat on Saturday. I didn't know if anyone had any, if everybody was still in favor of doing it this weekend. Mr. Donovan?
Just curious about the time.
That's one of the things I was going to discuss right now, was what worked for people for time frames. I don't know if you had any specific questions you wanted clarified about it.
The intent was to discuss just procedural rules and some of the other components of our work. And
Point of order, I can't hear you at all, sorry.
sure, just to discuss procedural rules and other concerns that anyone may have. And it's not a public session; it's a retreat. And then it would be, I would 8 to 12. I don't know what works for others, or if it's needed for longer.
One of the things Attorney Dan Stockford was going to present to answer some questions that Member Majerus-Collins had brought up previously. So he was going to come in for a period of that also to discuss that. Mr. Majerus-Collins.
That's all fine with me. I can, the not a public session seems not right. That we wouldn't be soliciting public comment, that it wouldn't be a meeting, all seems fine. But I think we run afoul of open meeting rules if we all gather and meet and talk about a bunch of stuff with regard to the school committee, unless we're in executive session, and none of that seems like it, except maybe the lawyer, seems like it would qualify for executive session.
I believe generally our retreats are open to the public if people
Just
want to
nobody shows up,
observe,
yeah.
but there's
Okay.
no public participation. I think that's how we usually do it.
Yeah, that's.
I was just going to make the same reference that that would be a violation of open meeting law for sure, and that there still should be a publicly posted agenda, just so folks know why we're gathering, the purpose. And I think it might behoove us to also come forward with a summary from this retreat as well. I think that's something that's been lacking in the past, even amongst ourselves internally. What we said we were going to set out to do, what we did, and what commitments we've made going forward. I also think it would be appropriate to announce those at the September 14th meeting, just so the public does know what we're doing for business.
Any other discussion?
It's 8 to 12 is the schedule.
That works for me.
Would we be here or at Dingley?
It would be here, I believe. I think that depends on facilities and tech. Well, we don't need tech.
There's a lot more space here in this setup than there is in the Dingley.
I'm really missing our green ladle meetings. I know that.
Yeah, so some of the things, I know that there's been requests to discuss the appointment of a vice chair, so I thought that would be an appropriate thing to have discussed at a retreat. The attorney-client privilege conversation that Member Majerus Collins would like to have. We need to work on our procedural rules. We need to address our start time of meetings, whether we're going to start at 5 for a period of time since our meetings have been running so late. We need to work on, part of this is part of the procedural rules. The definition of excused versus unexcused absences was something that was brought up. Conversation on, a very brief, I guess, conversation overview of Robert's rules, when motions are necessary versus discussions. The SRO plans was on here. And then if we have time, revisiting subcommittees, because that has sort of fallen off since COVID-19 started. Those were the ideas that I had, so I'm not sure if we can get all that done between 8 and 10, or, 8 and 12?
Anybody else have any?
Right, that's,
They've covered a lot.
I know.
I think we can get all that done.
In 4 hours?
The way we go.
And we should.
I don't need a last two things that, I just.
Dancer would be available, he would prefer first thing in the morning if possible.
I'd say stretch it to 1 at least. I mean, we've gone over a couple hours every single meeting we've ever done, so I don't know why this one would be any different.
So
Should
each
also
one?
prioritize. I mean, either we stay fast or we figure out which items are most important and then cut off at whatever time. I'm fine with either one, but I just suggest that we go into it with that sort of.
Send out a list of the topics that
Those were just things that we don't have to do all of those. Those were just things that people have brought up over time that seemed appropriate for a retreat versus having the conversation in a meeting. Yes, Ms. Wright.
Just an offer in case it's helpful. So it sounds like Mr. Majerus Collins is asking for a prioritization order. I'm happy to put together a quick Google form for everyone to fill out, and we can take things up in that order besides when the lawyer is available, if that feels most democratic.
Does anyone have any other items that they would like addressed at the retreat?
that'll be more than enough.
Okay, well, something that might take priority, I guess is what I was asking.
Can we write them up one more time?
Yeah, do you want me to just send the email to you?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I'll do that after.
I would think that if like somebody has something they want to make sure that we discuss, just send it to Megan and we can get that to be like top priority.
Yeah, like the procedural rules, is way overdue, so I think that's a priority. The attorney has suggested that he's available, but he would prefer to be first thing in the morning, so that obviously will take priority. And then we can kind of prioritize down from there. So everybody is good with Saturday, August 29th from 8 to 1? Here at Connors? And does that make it difficult for facilities, or?
Can someone let Linnea know?
Probably.
Let Linnea know.
But I think it's fine to use this space.
Okay. All right.
We don't need video or anything, do we?
No. Agenda item number 8, to receive and approve the district school calendar for the start of the 2020-2021 school year.
So just wanted to share that this isn't necessarily revisiting topics or timelines, but when we had the discussion we had on the 10th and we moved the start of school date, it kind of overlaps some other things that existed, teacher workshops, things like that that had been positioned to try to buy some days prior to. We put those back, and a couple other just making it accurate, if you will. The draft is in the packet, so no substantive changes per se, just putting things back because of the conversation that we had.
We still don't have the waiver on the number of days yet.
We don't have anything from the state on the waiver on the number of days yet. I did add it to my calendar that if we don't hear by November 1st, that I would apply for one as a school department.
I move we accept the proposed calendar.
Second.
Who seconded it? Any further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Agenda item number 10, to discuss and approve a waiver regarding the nepotism clause as it relates to interim superintendent's wife being employed at Farwell. Oh, did I skip 9?
Yep.
I'm sorry. Agenda item number 9, to receive and approve amended school committee meetings schedule for 2021.
So the draft that's in your inbox is a reflection of adding the weeks for the COVID updates if needed, and it's just in there with the original dates.
I move that we accept the schedule.
Second?
Any discussion?
Yes. So these are just for, I mean, because we have a meeting next week, that's not a...
This starts September 1st moving forward.
Yes.
Right, so, all right. So it's just up until December 14th, okay.
Any other discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous. Now, agenda item number 10, to discuss and approve a waiver regarding the nepotism clause as it relates to interim superintendent's wife being employed at Farwell.
So there's a standing policy in the Lewiston Public Schools Policy Manual that speaks about nepotism and hiring and employment practices due to various relationships that are family-based. My wife is a teacher at Farwell Elementary School, and if we're both able to carry out our jobs as best we can, we'd be looking for an agreement to waive the nepotism clause in this case.
Yeah, are we voting on that right now?
Wait, a motion, yeah, we would need a
Yeah, I just so moved.
Second.
We need wording for this motion.
It's approve a waiver regarding nepotism clause as it relates to interim superintendent's wife being employed at Farwell.
And we have a second discussion. Mr. Majerus-Collins.
Yeah, I'm just curious about what the district's policy is sort of without a waiver, like is it?
This process needs to happen. We need
No, I'm voting yes on this. I'm not that this is.
That's what our policy says.
Okay. Okay, so it's, and this would happen because you've moved from a position where you're not directly supervising her to one where you are indirectly supervising her?
No.
Is that basically the reason?
I'm looking up the reference real quick for you.
It just seems really removed from, I mean, I'm gonna vote for it, but it seems weird that we would say.
So I guess it's highly removed, but I think the policy is there to protect influence and
Okay.
because of familial connections. And
Yeah.
so, you know, the principal at Farwell or a different school, wherever that familial connection is, will things be influenced because of someone's position? And so to avoid that, just full disclosure, everybody knows up front. And,
Yes. So it doesn't have to do with supervision directly. It has to do with just relational, it seems like,
Right.
in the manual. We've done this process before with previous school committees, just so folks are aware.
Gotcha.
If that's helpful.
you know, second. She.
He second. Any other
Never mind.
discussion?
I don't know why my hand's up.
All in favor? And unanimous. Agenda item 11, to receive a report from the city council representative. Ms. Ray.
Thank you. Not much really going on. We had a meeting last week with some regular liquor licenses, amusement permits, that sort of thing. But we are accepting and appropriating a $212,000 grant from Keep Maine Healthy 2020 Municipal COVID-19 Awareness Campaign, Round 2. So we are able to continue to educate the public about this pandemic and ways to protect themselves against it. We also authorized Public Works to apply for the 2020 Recreational Trail Program, and there will be some hopeful improvements to Garcelon Bog Trail, which is a great benefit to all of us in the community, especially our school kids.
Thank you. Agenda item 12 is a report from the chair, and I don't have a report to give, an update to give tonight. So agenda item 13 is a report from school superintendent.
I think I covered the things that I really prioritize and needed to share out in our opening conversation about opening schools and the numerous concerns that we have and the work that's being done by so many.
Item 14, school committee community announcements. Does anyone have any announcements? I always look at you, you seem to have the announcements. Future agenda, sorry, agenda item number 15, any future agenda item requests? Mr. Isaac, Physic.
Special ed audit.
Yes, thank you.
Accessibility, I'd like to review that or a full presentation on it?
It's good for work with our presentation.
Okay, Mr. Damon.
Update on the DOJ.
And do you want that to be a presentation or just a conversation?
I think it could be, a fairly high level, almost like an executive summary thing. I don't think we need to get into the weeds of it at this point. The other item that I would like is I would like an executive summary of what's happening with Impact Academy. That I would like to actually have as a presentation.
Saturday.
At Impact Academy, it's a new program we're trying to get going at Longley.
Okay. Any other future agenda?
No, I brought it up, the homeless
Yeah, that's already on your list.
initiative, and I haven't heard back, so I don't know where it's at, so.
Anyone else? Agenda item 16, to adjourn?
Second.
Multiple
By
moved and
Bruce and
seconded.
second by
All in favor? Thank you.